I want to thank everybody for showing up on this special day. How many of you were at Anaheim for A1 last night? Show of hands. Yeah. It was a good race. We're here today to extend the celebration and enjoy fellowship time together. My name is Mark Mitchell, and I'm going to be your MC for today's events. And on behalf of the Malcolm Smith family and the team members, many of whom are in the audience, we want to say welcome. And for those of you that are watching virtually and participating on a virtual basis, welcome to you as well. So there's some words that came to mind as I was thinking about my dear friend Malcolm. Words like resolute, venerable, terse, astute, innovative, meticulous, erudite, unpretentious, self-effacing, compassionate, nurturer, mentor, friend, and yes, of course, a prankster, for those of you knew him. These words describe the man that I've known and had the honor of serving and his family for close to half a century. So today, I want to reflect on his greatest accomplishments, and you'll hear from many others shortly. And to me, his greatest accomplishments transcend anything he ever achieved in motorsports and business. His true legacy is best represented by and through the lives of each of us that he so deeply cared about, both here and abroad. So on this day and in those to come, we joyously celebrate the life of Malcolm Alexander Smith. So I have a quick story. So the first story of my encounter with Malcolm was when I met him in, I think it was '82. I just started my practice and I was looking for business clients, and so I saw an advertisement that he had that highlighted his products, and his tagline was something to the effect of Best by Test. And if you knew Malcolm, he wouldn't endorse anything that he didn't believe in, no matter how much profit there was or upside to him. That was just the way that he was wired. And so I figured, I'm as good as he is in my field, and I believe in what I do. So I sent him an envelope full of nice brochures and sayings about the things that we thought we could do for his company and his employees and his family. And I said, I'll call you in 2 weeks. So I called, and this nice lady answered the phone, Dee Alsop. That was his assistant at the time. She politely passed me through, and then I go, man, what am I going to do now? So he picks the phone up, and he says, this is Malcolm. He says, hi, my name is Mark. I sent you information about 2 weeks ago. I'd love to have the opportunity to talk to you. So he says, I don't like salespeople, and I don't want to be bothered. I said, okay, if you knew Malcolm, that's just how he rolled. And so with all the gumption that I had in me, I said, well, you know, to be honest, I can understand that. But I got to tell you something. I says, I learned about you when I was about 10 years old, and I bought a lot of your products. I cut lawns. I threw newspapers over in Carson, where I grew up. And a lot of your products were good, but some of your stuff was pretty crappy, but I still believed in you. I said, so you owe me the visit. And that's how we met. So he says, I'll give you 15 minutes. So I came out. I only got 15 minutes. He says, great. And I had a habit as I
This was especially true when the activity was riding motorcycles. I contend my dad actually used the word riding rather loosely. He loved to explore on his motorcycles, which usually meant pushing our bikes up random waterfalls or lifting our bikes over a forest of downed trees just to see what was on the other side. But I believe my dad had a charmed life, and things usually end up working out great for him, which did two things for me. It gave me the confidence to seek out my own adventures, and good or bad, led me to have an almost blind faith in my father. A good example of this is the time he sent me on a 6-hour mountain bike ride with a simple pointed finger and the words, I think there's a trail down there. That was a solid lesson in trust and perseverance, and that spirit is something I continue to carry with me today. My dad had a way of knowing that no matter how difficult the journey was, there was something very valuable at the end of it. For many people, Heroes and legends can appear larger than life, but the reality can be almost impossible to live up to. But I can tell you, my dad was every bit the man you imagine. He was tough and he was adventurous, yes, but he was also kind and he was humble. And that signature smile you all knew so well, it wasn't just for show. It reflected the warmth, the generosity, and the joy that defined him. My dad lived his life to the fullest. And as we honor his life today, I know he wouldn't want us to dwell too long on the sadness of losing him. Instead, he'd want us to live boldly, to embrace the adventures ahead, and to approach life with the same enthusiasm that he brought to his everyday. In the end, knowing this gives me a great deal of solace and helps me cope with the loss I feel so deeply today. I hope it does the same for you. Thank you.
Next, I want to bring to the stage, or the podium, longtime friend, confidant, compadre, Mr. Bud Feldkamp. Give him a round of applause.
Asked me to give a few remarks. I said, of course, and he said, make sure they're true. And there's enough people here that knew Malcolm that will confirm that these remarks are true. And what I learned, first off, I got a motorcycle when I was like 20 years old. Always wanted one, and had to borrow money from my girlfriend at the time to buy it. But Pete Nelson here talked me into it and said I told her that this is all I ever would need, was to get this one motorcycle for $400. This is it. First motorcycle, last motorcycle. And then I took it to Malcolm's shop. You know, it would break down. It was a Honda 160. And I'd take it to Malcolm's shop, and he'd work on it and get it going for me. And that's how I got to know Malcolm. And then one day he said, Bud, he said, you want to race the Baja 1000 with me? Well, of course I did. You know, and so we spent a lot of time together, Malcolm and I, and the stories I'm going to tell you today are from Malcolm. I mean, these are stories he told me. So whether they're true or not, that's up to you guys to decide whether they're true, but I'm sure they are true. I know Malcolm told me. Well, one of the first ones that sticks out in my mind was the Stardust 7-Eleven. I don't know if you guys know about that race, but that was a race that went on in the 60s, and the Stardust Hotel, a big hotel in Las Vegas, put up $25,000 cash prize to the winner of this race. Well, Malcolm had to join that race. I mean, he had to be in that race. And he found a buddy that had a car. This is Malcolm telling the story. And he found a car, and he got a little Volkswagen engine in it, and they took off, and sure enough, they're in the race, and they got 30 miles from the finish in the 7-Eleven race in Las Vegas, in that $25,000 purse. Well, most people, and they blew the motor up. Most people, when you blow a motor up, you're done, right? You know, your motor blew up, I'm done. Not Malcolm. Never give up Malcolm. He says, well, this is a Volkswagen. There's a spectator there with a Baja Bug, and maybe we can talk him into taking his engine. Now, these are stories he's telling me, and so I got the message, Malcolm, we never give up. And so he takes the engine out, he talks to the spectator into giving it to him, and they put it into the race car, and everything fits except the throttle linkage. It doesn't fit, it doesn't work. And that's no problem. He just wires it wide open, and they finish the last 30 miles with the ignition switch on, off, on, off. They won the race. So hence, never give up, Malcolm. And I think that's instilled upon me, never give up. He was very passionate about motorcycles, and he never raced for money. I think he raced because he had a passion for it. And as everybody here, I'm sure, has a huge passion for motorcycles. And one of the stories that I remember from Bill Newberry, where they're building a house. Malcolm was a constructive guy. He would build houses. He built 3 houses. He built 2 race cars from scratch. And on the second house, they were building in Colorado. Joel knows the house well, and Alexander knows the house well. And my father-in-law, Bill Newberry, was kind of a gopher for Malcolm. He would work with Malcolm, and they would help him build these houses. And so they're building a house in Colorado, and Bill would have to go to the lumber yard. And they go to the lumber yard, and the guys at the lumberyard, salesman, is it true? Is it true that it's the Malcolm Smith's building a house out here in Colorado? Yeah, it is true. Really? Then you come back next week, get more lumber, and they say, we have a hill out here that nobody in Colorado has been able to get to the top of. And they're all, do you think your boss, Malcolm, would come and try that hill? Because we're making book on whether Malcolm could make that hill or couldn't. Some of us think he could, and some of us think he couldn't. And Bill said, I don't know, I'll ask him. So he asked Malcolm. A week or so later, Malcolm said, what about that hill? Maybe we should meet those guys. So Bill set it up. So they were going to meet the guys from the lumberyard, and all the dirt bike guys from around came in Colorado, and they were going to meet at the hill that nobody could make. And sure enough, Malcolm gets on his Husky, and he had a talent. Did he have a talent? But he took off, went up a road all the way up to the top of the hill, turned around and rode back down the hill, turned around and rode back up the hill, and turned around and came back down the hill. And then he says, is that good enough? That was Malcolm. So, yeah. One final story. I've got to tell this story. This is right out of Malcolm's book of stories, where he said I don't know, a lot of you guys remember that when he was going in his business, MSR, Malcolm Smith Racing Products, he was getting successful. He bought a green 911 Porsche. A green 911 Porsche. This, he was starting on his stride going. And so he had a house up in Arrowhead. And one Sunday morning, they were getting ready for breakfast and didn't have any milk in the house. And Malcolm said, I'll take the Porsche. I'll drive 3 miles down to the market there, get some milk, and I'll be right back. Well, he goes down there, and in Arrowhead, the roads are curvy, and, if you're really early in the morning, you can just straighten the road out, go over the yellow line, whatever you want to do. Well, there was a highway patrolman. And he turned the lights on Malcolm. Now, you got to understand the thought process in Malcolm's mind. He had just bought this Porsche. He's thinking about the mortgage. He's thinking about the payroll, how he's going to pay for this, and whatever the insurance is going to be if he buys a Porsche. So he tells the cop, CHP, hey, give me a break. Come on. It's Sunday morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. The cop wasn't going to hear it all. So the cop, he takes the ticket. He says, here, Malcolm, you need to sign the ticket that acknowledges that you got this ticket. Malcolm takes it, writes Mickey Mouse. Gives it back to the cop, the CHP, and he starts shuffling around the car and whatever. And he said, you have to sign this. You have to sign this. This acknowledges you got it. And so he gives it back to him, and Malcolm writes, fuck you. He gives it to him. And now this cop is really Twitter-pated. Malcolm wasn't going to acknowledge that he deserved this ticket. So finally the cop, he walking around the car, didn't know what to do, and he hands the card back to Malcolm. He says, come on, Malcolm, you got to sign this. He put a big X in the middle of it. The cop said, that's good enough. And that was it. But anyway, I think that's a little parable on his life. A little bit when I think about it. When he was at his top of his game when he got Parkinson's. He got it, and he was going to beat it. you know, and he was not going to, it was a Mickey Mouse thing to him. He was going to beat it. Joyce was there with him, and they were going to beat it. And things progressed, and it progressed over 20 years. And, you know, then it became more of a serious thing and more of a FU thing. And I would call Malcolm up, and I'd ask him, he was always optimistic. I'd say, Malcolm, how are you doing? And he says, well, not very good, bud, but I'm getting better. I'm not doing very good, bud, but I'm getting better. Finally, he wouldn't acknowledge this Parkinson's disease until the end, and when he put the X in, and that's when he was at the end. And Joyce, you're an angel for taking care of him for the last, we're married to him, I don't know how many years, but you were there for better or for worse. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you, bud. All right. Give him a round of applause. Thanks, bud.
I'm done. Okay, I got more, but that's okay.
You can see Bud out in the parking lot for more stories, chapter 2. Thank you, Bud. Troy Lee is up next. Troy, what do you got to say?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to, hope we don't get all tearied up here, man, but Malcolm meant the world to me. Watching the movie on any Sunday just totally changed my life and kind of set my whole path, my direction. And when I saw that movie, Malcolm was kind of like, I mean, I was 12 years old, and I think Batman and Robin and maybe, you know, Superman were my idols. And after I saw that movie, Malcolm Smith, Mert Lowell, and Steve McQueen were my new idols. They were my new superheroes. And I started running that direction and did everything I could to be a racer. My dad was an artist, and so I started painting helmets. And Malcolm was just one of those guys. He was a mentor for me, and I looked up to him, and I tried to be as much like, I just thought he just treated people really fairly. And I really didn't even know him. I took all this from the movie, but I just felt a super warm and a strong vibe from him too, with everything he's accomplished in all the motorcycle racing and the different disciplines. And when I met him, finally did get to meet him, I got to meet him at the Elsinore, just barely shake his hand, but I got to ride with him a couple times, and real man, just a really quality person. And the biggest second thing that he did for me was set me on my path in that direction with loving motorcycles and racing and painting. But he was the first one to carry my visors. I came out to his place, Malcolm Smith Products, and my mom and me split the molds. We built some molds in Japan, and I've got the visors in, and I had to go out and try to sell them. I used to do the first ones vacuuming forming in my oven at my house, and I walked into Malcolm's place and showed him what I was doing. It didn't really go really well with the buyer there at first. I got kind of said, hey man, your visors are 12 bucks, they should be $4. I don't know if we want to carry them. I started walking down the hall, kind of going, dang, this didn't work, man, this is a bummer. And Malcolm saw me and asked me, hey, how'd it go? And I go, oh, it didn't go real well. He called me into his office, and I showed him the colors that I was doing, the adjustable and everything, and he walked me back out of his office, back down to the buyer, and said, I want to order 25 of each color. Let's put it in the catalog. And I was like, oh my God, it was just amazing for me. I think it set me on my path for what I'm still doing today. So, love you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Troy. Appreciate it. I want to bring up a good friend of Malcolm's and my riding buddy, my angel. He may tell the story. Mr. Don Mackey. Round of applause. Thank you, Don.
Well, I don't really think that Bruce Brown had this in mind when he called it On Any Sunday. But this is Sunday, and we're here for Malcolm. Alexander called and said that we're going to have this and asked me if I'd say a few words. And I thought, God damn, that's going to be hard. And it's going to be hard, so just bear with me. I'll give it a try. He was our friend. Many of you knew him passively. Some of you knew him intimately. He was a great guy. We had rides with him. We had adventures with him. We had life experiences that he helped create. And when we think about Malcolm, I'm going to have to really try hard on this. When we think about Malcolm today, we have to think of him as he was when we knew him, not with the struggles he faced later in life. This is a time for celebration and not a time for sorrow. We should be proud. We should be thankful for our good fortune of having him in our lives for the years that we did. I don't have a lot of anecdotes and, you know, he fixed my tire and he did this and he did that. I want to talk to you about Malcolm Smith. We all had the good fortune of having him in our lives. He shared his warmth, friendship, generosity, and we had unforgettable lifetime adventures with him. I call them life experiences. Yeah, he was a bike rider. Sure, he was a bike rider. That's how most people knew him. My son, I got the opportunity to ride with my son on one of the 7-day rides a couple of times, but he had to ride with Malcolm. You know, I was a lot smarter than that. I wasn't getting involved in that torture fest at all. And so I asked Nick at the end of the day, I said, hey, how was it riding with Malcolm? Nick was about 35. He said, oh, Malcolm, he can still get it on. So I always remember that. And to me, in my generation, I'm older than most of you, not as old as some, but Malcolm was what we called a he-man. And I knew him much deeper than that. I knew him more than as a bike rider. With Malcolm, it was always the journey. It was never the destination. Roger DeCoster, my good friend, called me and said, hey, they called me from a magazine and want me to write an article on the real Malcolm. And I thought, the real Malcolm? How appropriate is that? And I believe Roger did write that article. But Malcolm called me 35 years ago and he said, hey, where do they get those trucks? I was a car dealer. Where do they get those trucks they furnish for the Colorado 500? And I said, well, Malcolm, they're either given to them by the local dealers or the manufacturer gives them to them and then they sell them as demos or special event vehicles. And he said that he wanted to try to do something for Baja that had given him so much over his lifetime and do something for the orphanage at Valley de Trinidad. And I said, well, hell, I'll furnish the trucks. So I furnished the trucks and he furnished the event. It was a great, great situation. Then the years went by as they seemed to. He created the Malcolm Smith Motorsports Foundation and Malcolm Smith Adventures, and they were primarily and virtually solely to help the children of El Oasis Orphanage and the orphans there. We had a young man come at one of the rides who had come through the orphanage, and they age out at about 18. And he talked about when he lost his parents. He didn't lose his parents. His parents abandoned him, and he was picked up by the orphanage. Those kids down there had no chance in life. Malcolm changed all that for many of them. Over 1,200 riders have ridden the 7 days of Baja over the last 30 years, some of us 20 and 30 times, raised $2 million for the orphanage. And the orphanage has no paid employees. Malcolm sucked up that in the dealership here. They had no expenses. I think they did expense their stamps or something like that, Joyce told me one time. But he was real proud of that. Malcolm was real proud of that. And Joyce, Ashley, and Alexander have continued the efforts as Malcolm found it very difficult to do later in life. He had legions of fans, but he was really a pretty private guy. He said to me one day on the ride, he said, you know, Don, you never know how many more of these you got left in you. I always remember that. I think of what he did for those kids down there. Selflessness, generosity, compassion, makes me smile. That's the Malcolm Smith that I knew. It surpasses any adventure ride he could ever taken us on. The kids that had no chance, many of them are now grown, they're educated, and they have success in life. When we pass, the only thing we take with us is the things that we gave away. Malcolm took a lot with him. And when I'm called to go, and it's my time, I know I'll run into him up there in the pits with a big smile. Won't know where I've been. I love Malcolm, and I think it's okay for grown men to say that. We all shared a lot of great adventures with Malcolm over the years. Please cherish those memories and the fact that we had Malcolm in our lives for the time that we did. I love Malcolm. Rest in peace, old friend. God bless and keep you. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Next, I want to invite up Bill Mucho Wheeler. If you know anything about him, well, I'll let him tell you about him. Come on up, Bill.
That's the whole thing? That's the whole intro? Nice job, Don. That was amazing. Thank you for that. When I think of Malcolm, I think of the way he made you feel. No matter who you are, who you came with, how much money you have, or how much talent, in my case, didn't have, Malcolm had a way of making you feel like you belonged. He didn't just invite you on an adventure, Malcolm invited you into his family, his world, and his endless pursuit of life. I met Malcolm on an adventure that started with a small classified ad for Malcolm Smith Adventures in the back of Cycle News. Before I knew it, I was standing in Santiago, Chile, almost shocked to actually see Malcolm and Joyce at the luggage carousel. And then, just like that, they both greeted me like I'd been a lifelong friend. That was Malcolm's magic. He'd welcome you, make you laugh, and make sure you never felt like a stranger. On that first trip outside of Tierra del Fuego, Chile, I got my nickname. It started with Malcolm calling me Macho, and I was horrified that somehow that was going to be my nickname, Macho. And it wasn't something I was looking forward to, but something that happened. Fortunately, our guide was quickly to correct him and said, "No, Malcolm, it's not Macho, it's Mucho. There's just too much of him." And Malcolm loved it. And from that moment on, he always called me Mucho. Malcolm had a way of making everything an inside joke, shared by the two of you. Suddenly, you weren't just part of the adventure, you were part of the fun. On one of Malcolm's early Baja ride, I met six-day gold medal recipient Chris Carter of Motion Pro fame and one of the most generous supporters of the entire motorcycle industry. Rob, are you here? Can you hear me? Where's Rob Dingman? Somewhere. Nice to see you. Thanks to Malcolm, that introduction turned into a 25-year friendship and over 30,000 miles in Baja with Chris and literally hundreds of motorcycle adventures all over the world. Thank you, Malcolm. One of the most profound adventures Malcolm led us on wasn't even on two wheels, but at El Oasis Orphanage in Valle de Trinidad. What started as a simple ride turned into pouring foundations for buildings, building a baseball field, a solar well, filling houses with bunk beds and mattresses, creating a library, a computer lab, and every year, tons of Christmas cheer. Malcolm showed us how to take what we love and turn it into something that matters, something that makes a difference. I'll never forget taking a break from our duties at the orphanage and riding up to Mike's Sky Ranch with Malcolm, Alexander, and my son. And for many years, the boys rode our Baja trips together. Watching our boys ride together with that same sense of adventure that Malcolm instilled in all of us. That's who Malcolm was. He didn't just share his love of riding, he showed us how to pass it on, to lift others, and to create memories that last forever. And then, of course, there were all the laughs, many of which I really just can't tell you here in this mixed group. But like the time Malcolm banged on my door one early morning in Laredo, fully geared up, helmet on, banging on the door. Me, I'm passed out from a night of merrymaking at Mike's Piano Bar in lovely Laredo, and possibly that other little club down the street. I answered the door in my underwear, hungover, and pretending not to hear him say, "Mucho, you're the last rider out. Chase trucks need your gear bag by now," which is something anybody on this ride has heard many times before. "Mucho, get your gear on, we gotta go." And Malcolm says, "You're sweeping with me today." Oh, crap. Now, I mean, riding with Malcolm, and I'm hungover, and I can't hardly, anyway. So, over Mount San Javier we go, into Constitucion, down the Baja course, down the coast to La Paz, helping other riders along the way. That day, I followed Malcolm through 300 miles of Baja, sucking on my dry camelback and praying for just one more sip, clinging to my handlebars and wondering if I was going to make it. Malcolm never said a word all day about it. He just gave me that smile and said, "You should probably drink some more water, Mucho." Now, and if I had it, I would have. So seemingly amused at my self-inflicted sickness. Malcolm never met a stranger. Whether it was a fan, a rider, a guy at the gas pump, or all the children at the orphanage, he had this special kindness and humility that made everyone feel like they mattered and that they were important. He taught us that life's best moments not only just come in adventure, but from sharing it, from lifting others, and from leaving the world just a little bit better off than we found it. So today, let's laugh, let's tell some stories, and then we'll laugh some more. Malcolm would remind us that life is the greatest adventure, but it's nothing without the people we love. Cherish your family, treasure the adventure with open hearts and fearless spirits. Thank you, Smith family, for this honor. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming out here today. It's a beautiful day for everyone. I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. Mr. Frank Esposito, many of you know Frank was the former CEO chairman of Tucker Rocky and a dear friend of Malcolm's. Thank you, Frank. Take your time.
No notes. Does anybody know the name of the patron saint of motorcycling? Recently canonized. Patron saint of motorcyclists is Saint Columbanus, and I'm not stuttering or whatever, it doesn't roll right off the tongue. Saint Columbanus, worth looking up and worth reading. And as I was preparing for this and looked at my Saint Columbanus medal, I drew a interesting look at Malcolm's life and the life of the patron saint of motorcyclists. Although centuries and centuries apart, they shared so many things. They were warriors. They were adventurers. They were risk takers. They were prophets. They were teachers. They were mentors. They loved other human beings. And most important is, as St. Columbanus adventured through the Alps single-handedly to find a way to establish new monasteries, the similarity is that both Malcolm and St. Columbanus built institutions that will long live past their material lives. It's been said, and I'm not a believer in the term self-made man. I don't think there is such a thing. I believe that for a man to achieve greatness, it requires to be surrounded by those of greatness. And to that point, I just say, take a look around. And it's not just here. That statement could be made worldwide. And as we look at that, mostly focused toward the motorcycle industry, I offer you that that's the smallest part of the greatness that made Malcolm Malcolm. His family loved him, supported him unconditionally. And it is my belief that without his wonderful family, Malcolm Smith is not Malcolm Smith. Through life, it's been said that things happen very slowly until they happen all of a sudden. And to that point, I would offer this analogy of how I looked at Malcolm, his life, and how could I maybe paint a picture that hopefully you won't forget. Slowly, we've all been to concerts, outdoor events, races, and they start in the daylight, and they go through the twilight and toward the darkness, and that all happens slowly. And then all of a sudden, an unmistakable sound and gut feeling that you all know. And it doesn't sound like a gunshot, a cannon, it has its unique sound, and that's of whoever knows how many watts and volts initially going through, and bang, the lights go on for the stadium. And that is what on any Sunday did by Malcolm Smith for this industry. That bright white light got lit. It'll never diminish, and it's up to all of us to make sure it keeps growing. And I'll end with a story and something that I have that none of you will ever have. When I was the president and COO of Tuckeraki, our sales meetings were famous. They were huge. And I started the sales meeting with a simple remark and question. And I said, is it worth $1 to you to find out one of the great secrets to successful selling? Got quiet, and I said, okay, if it's worth $1, take $1 out of your pocket, sign it, date it, and bring it up to me. And about 10, maybe 15 reps did that, and believe it or not, so did Malcolm. I think that's the first time any of us ever saw that he had a wallet. And the meeting went on, and these meetings were very intense. There was about 120 people in the audience, and we're winding up, and I said, well, I think we're ready to wrap things up and take a break and then enjoy a nice dinner together. And if there's no other questions or any unfinished business, we're going to wrap things up. And Malcolm jumped out of his seat and says, hey, wait a minute. How about my dollar? And I said, Malcolm, you didn't listen to me, or let me make my point clear. I said, if you want a secret to successful sailing, is it worth $1? I didn't ask you to lend me your dollar, to borrow it. I asked you to give me $1. And he went, oh. And he said, yeah, but what's the point? You never said anything. Well, I said, I was waiting for somebody to ask, and I'm a little taken back that none of the sales force asked the question. He says, well, what's the answer? And I said, if you want something in life, especially a sales order, ask for it. And that was the moral of that story. And I have that. This has only been out of my wallet 3 times. Once was because my wallet got old and crappy and I had to change it. And it's signed by Malcolm. There's a couple photos of this. I'm not going to pass this around. It's been with me every time I have my wallet with me, which is a lot, since 1993. So the moral of that story is Malcolm has always been with me for a very long time. He has been a major influence on my life, and he taught me the values of things way more substantive than just racing and riding motorcycles. He taught me about family. He taught me about values. He inspired me. And with that piece of inspiration, it is my hope and commitment that if I live a good life and I dedicate that to my family and dedicate the rest of my life to the service of others, and God forgives my sins of the past, that I may make it to heaven. And if and when I do, and I see Malcolm, the first thing I will tell him is, you're not getting your dollar back.
Good lesson, Frank. Thank you so much.
And you
Appreciate
can
it.
verify this.
It is. It's his authentic signature. Thank you so much. I want to bring to the stage Ray Munganast. Ray, come on up. Ray is in from St. Louis. Many of you may remember his father, who was a mentor to me as well, Dave, and I'm sure you've got as many good stories as he does. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. As Mark said, I'm Ray Munganast from St. Louis, Missouri. Malcolm and my father had a long-time friendship that later really turned into kind of a brotherly friendship, and both of them agreed that's what it was, because they loved each other, but they could rough each other up, and they could tease each other about being cheap and everything else. The stories are endless about the two of them together. It began in 1967 in Poland at the ISDT, and as Malcolm would tell you, he's never seen, speaking about my father's performance that year, he's never seen somebody crash so much and still get a gold medal. Through the years, they continued to compete together, but after that, it turned into a lot of adventure rides and just a whole lot of fun together, endless adventures, including Europe, China, South America, Colorado, and Baja. I can remember on more than one occasion, if I happened to be in my dad's office at the time and things weren't going real well for him or business wasn't like we hoped, if the phone rang and he saw it was Malcolm, he always took the call immediately. And as soon as the call was over, he felt 100% better. He was smiling, he was happy, because they were planning their next adventure or business deal or something together. So Malcolm had a very positive influence on my father, and I think most people would say probably the same way going back. Just two wonderful guys that grew together and, were both very good for motorcycling, but Malcolm meant a lot to Dad, that's for sure. In 2006, when Dad was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, I called Malcolm just to let him know that it was terminal and he only had a couple months to live. Malcolm's immediate words were, "I'm coming, I'll be there." And within 72 hours, he was in St. Louis to spend time with Dad. So that speaks to the relationship, but it also speaks to who Malcolm was as a person and a friend. We love him, we miss him. Godspeed, Malcolm.
Thank you, Dave. All right. Call Scott Harden to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. These guys stole all my stuff. I don't know what else to say. First of all, it's great to be surrounded by so many familiar faces. I look here before me, I see my life, and a damn good life it's been. A lot to do with Malcolm Smith. To say he left a huge mark on all of us is a mild, huge, gigantic understatement. I was fortunate to know the man for some 50 years as a competitor, a sponsored rider, as a teammate, a business associate, and a friend. I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for Malcolm. Looking back, it's amazing to think of all the things he accomplished in life. Some will say it's all because of On Any Sunday. And even he would be the first to admit that that gave him a great head start. But honestly, if there hadn't been the man behind that, the man who Malcolm was, he would have just been a blip on the radar screen. He would have been one and done. It would take all day to list all the things that he accomplished in life as a racer, a businessman, a philanthropist, as an advocate, and most important of all, as a family man. But I'm not here to talk about those things. I'm here to talk about how he made us feel, the way he inspired us. I witnessed this over and over at races, at banquets, at dealer meetings and trade shows. I saw it in the people's faces as they waited to get a chance to meet the man. He had an uncanny way of making you feel you were the most important person in the world. Whether it was a warm handshake or the way he looked you in the eye or that big, silly ear-to-ear grin. He had a goofy grin, but it was genuine. Malcolm made every interaction feel significant. He treated everyone with the same respect and kindness, leaving a lasting impression on anyone fortunate enough to cross his path. He provided a great example for me, especially on how to treat others. In my case, as a young upcoming racer, his words of encouragement and support meant everything. I hung on every word he told me as I was growing up at the office over there on Marlborough Avenue. There are countless stories of other racers, employees, customers, everyday people whose lives were changed by this man in some meaningful way. What a great gift he gave everyone. One of the most things I admired about Malcolm, and I got to see this firsthand in Baja and in rallies in Africa and South America, was how he handled pressure. The man had an absolute genius of getting into the deepest of shit and coming out smelling like a rose. It was just a phenomenal. He just did it. But the reason is he never got flustered. The man never got flustered. He could be in the most tense of situations, and he was just as calm as a cucumber. I really respected that about Malcolm and learned a lot in the process just watching how he dealt with things. We all know Malcolm had a reputation for being a tough businessman. I got to see that side of him firsthand. And even though he could drive a hard bargain, he was a man of unparalleled integrity. His word was his bond. He had this old school way that spoke louder than words of how he dealt with people and how he made business decisions over and over again that was just rooted in pure common sense and treating people fairly. In a world that feels more unsteady every day, we all look around and see what's going on in the world around us. Malcolm was a rock, a dependable, steadying force for everything good about power sports. Honestly, we need him more now than ever. And I have a mission for you guys at the end of this speech. As we all know, Malcolm had a reputation for being frugal. How many know about that side of Malcolm? Let's just say he was a fucking tightwad. I mean, Malcolm was a tightwad. I saw him arguing over bills with, like, I only had the ham and eggs and a small coffee. But most people don't know that he was born with a childhood affliction. Malcolm was born with alligator arms. He just could not somehow find the wallet. So he survived. He was the best racer ever with alligator arms. But don't let that fool you. He gave of more important things. He gave his time, his energy, and his spirit. Things of much greater value, I assure you, than anything to do with money. And as has been mentioned already, just ask the kids at the orphanages in Baja what he's done to their lives. There are countless other examples of his generosity. I could go on and on about it. I want to end with just a few lessons that I learned from Malcolm. These are priceless things these are words from his lips that made me who I am, and whatever success I've been able to have was a result of it. Number one, nothing is guaranteed in life. Ride as much as you can while you can, and never put a good ride off. Never put a good ride off. Sometimes you must slow down to go fast. Best words of wisdom I ever heard. Number three, it's not a real ride until it's dark, you're almost out of gas, you're 50 miles away from your truck, and no one has a working headlight. How many people have been on a ride with Malcolm like that? Let me see the hands. Number four, racing is a thinking man's sport. Duh. Followed by riding wide open in the dust has an expiration date. Yes, it does. In racing and business, knowing when to risk and knowing when to settle for the cards you've been dealt determines how successful you are at what you're doing. How true. This one stuck with me in many ways in Dakar and 6 days and other things. No matter how tired, how cold or miserable you are, pain and discomfort is temporary. Quitting lasts forever. How true. I love this one. I remember the day he told me this. Chase your dreams. And while you are dreaming, you might as well dream big. Be gracious when you lose, and even more so when you win. Family comes first. They're the only ones that will be around you within the end. And Malcolm had an amazing family, and we're all part of that. If you're not having fun, then why the hell are you doing it? All right, the last lesson he taught me, the most important one of all, most important lesson of all time. If someone else offers to pick up the dinner tab, let them. I'll never forget the way Malcolm made me feel. Let us carry forward, this is my charge to all of you. Let us carry forward his passion for motorcycling, especially now when motorcycling could really use some good news and some positive energy. He's not physically here with us, but his spirit lives on in us and the countless lives he touched. Think of him every time you throw your leg on the motorcycle with your friends and you go out on a great adventure somewhere. He's right there beside you. Malcolm's legacy will endure our lives forever. I just want to thank the Smith family for sharing him with us, for doing this today. I know how hard this must be on all of you, but God bless you. Thanks for letting Malcolm be a part of our families as well. Rest in peace, Malcolm. You are truly one of a kind, and we'll miss you.
Thank you, Scott, for that most reverent speech. Thank you, sir. Next, I want to bring to the stage Mitch, you've read Mitch's articles in the AMA magazine, did that wonderful book with Malcolm a number of years ago. So welcome to the stage, Mitch. Thank you so much, sir.
Wow. Hello, everybody. I'm Mitch Boehm, Editorial Director of the American Motorcyclists Association. It's really good to see all of you here. I know a lot of you I don't, but it feels like a family thing. I've been thinking about Malcolm a lot lately. I know all of you have too. We've heard a lot of really interesting and wonderful stuff about the man today. But I keep thinking about the word luck and the concept of luck. When it comes to Malcolm, there's a lot of stuff regarding luck. Our industry is so lucky to have had Malcolm Smith, and in so many ways. His ambassadorship, his energy, his activism, and that big smile he had. And we're all lucky to have known Malcolm, because I know just about everybody in this room knew Malcolm in some way, some of you very intimately. All of those memories we have are special, and I know all of you will cherish them for a long time. There's just no getting around it. I feel incredibly fortunate, too, to have known Malcolm. Not all that well, at least in the beginning. My relationship with Malcolm was really, really different and really, really unique. And this is because somehow, some way, I ended up being invited to help him with his autobiography. I remember how it happened like it was yesterday. I'd been thinking a lot about the fact that Malcolm hadn't done an autobiography yet, and I just kept having the feeling that he needed to do one. And one day when I was buying myself one of those little digital recorders that we used to use before everybody had an iPhone, I bought two, and I saw Malcolm at an event back in 2011 or 2012, and I handed it to him. I said, "Malcolm, you've got to do an autobiography." And he goes, I know, with that sheepish shake of his head and that smile. He said, "Sometimes I'm just really a procrastinator," and we laughed about that. A year or so later at Vintage Motorcycle Days, Malcolm and Joyce grabbed me and said, "Let's go to lunch." I didn't really know what was going on, but I said, "Sure, let's go." My son Alex was with me. They got right to the point once we sat down. Malcolm said, "Mitch, we want you to help me do my autobiography." And of course, I was floored. As soon as I could talk, I said, "Of course." I mean, how else do you respond to that question, right? And so we got started. We figured out what chapters we would do. We started digging through Malcolm's vast archive, some of it here, some of it at home. And wherever Joyce is, she was a huge help digging through all those old photos. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of photos, and they weren't all prints. Some of them were negatives, some of them were slides. They had to be scanned and looked at. It was a difficult thing, but we got through it. Took us a long time to do it, 3 years. And we had some challenges in the middle. One of the challenges was Malcolm's Parkinson's and the medication that he had to take to control it. The other was my son's brain cancer diagnosis, which took surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation to fix, but it got fixed. But in 2015, we got it done, and I think it's gone a good ways in helping a lot of people in the motorcycle industry and outside of the industry understand what Malcolm Smith was all about. I just want to talk about the process a little bit. We would gather pretty often in Malcolm's, we'd gather pretty often in Malcolm's house, in his living room or in the kitchen or out on the porch. And we'd talk about, once we established what the chapters were, we would talk about his life in detail for hours and hours and hours. Normally these sessions were 3, 4, 5 hours apiece. And we talk about his adventurous parents, his early years at Salt Spring Island growing up in British Columbia, when his family moved to San Bernardino right around the corner here, his bicycle and go-kart exploits. He also had some bulldozer exploits at about 8 or 9 years old, if you can believe that. Literal bulldozer exploits. You gotta You can't believe what he did. Then he got the Lambretta scooter, and then he found the matchless single, and then he had that horrific crash where he almost lost his leg. And I mean, he almost lost it. They were going to amputate until his mother, Betty, found a doctor at UCLA who was practicing bone grafting. He was one of the first people who was involved in bone grafting, and it ended up working. Malcolm was in his element during those chats, telling stories like he loved to do. All of you probably know his storytelling ability. I would be typing away furiously on my computer, and my iPhone was recording all of it. We used a big dry erase board, and we would list all the years of his life across the top and down the middle, and we would write down all the major events in his life. And we used that sort of as a guide as we put together the chapters and talked about the book. Late in the process, I arrived at the house for a 4 or 5 hour session, and I think it was Malcolm's grandchildren who had erased the board. Luckily, I had taken a picture a week or two earlier, and we were able to recreate it a little bit, but that was a scary one. When we had enough material for a chapter, I would boil it all down and write it up into a narrative, and then Malcolm and I would go over it word by word by word in his front room or out on the porch or in the kitchen. It was amazing. Malcolm would have a paper copy, and I would be on my computer. We'd read through everything, make changes, tweak this and tweak that. And then I'd come back a week later after making all the changes that he wanted to make, and we'd read it again. And normally by that point, it was pretty close to being final. It was always fun to be done with a chapter. Then we would send it off to our art director, Todd Westover, who's here somewhere. I'm not sure where Todd is. There he is, right there. Todd is our art director at American Motorcycles Magazine, and he also was the art director for Malcolm's book. So thank you, Todd. Thank you, Todd. As we talked over the months about his life in detail, and there's some amazing detail, I couldn't help but discover a lot about what made Malcolm Smith, Malcolm Smith. I just feel so lucky to be involved in that discussion with him. Why was Malcolm so gracious to strangers? We've heard all the stories today about why he was and how he was so gracious to everybody and how he made everybody feel welcome and smiled. I think it had a lot to do with his mother and father. When Malcolm was living in Salt Spring Island up in British Columbia, a Canadian Air Force plane crashed in the woods, and it had some sensitive equipment on it that they sent a bunch of soldiers to guard until they could recover the airplane. These guys were sleeping in the woods. Malcolm's mom and dad invited the guys when they were off duty to sleep in the house and to eat. And there were World War II rations happening at the time, so they had almost no food. But they did have sheep, because they lived on a sheep farm. And they fed these guys, and the neighbors were freaking out saying, "There's no food for them, what are you doing?" And they didn't care. So what fueled his adventurous spirit? It was definitely growing up on Salt Spring Island, fishing, crabbing, and boating, the bicycling, and the motorcycling, and the Huck Finn type exploring in San Bernardino when he moved here when he was about 6. What made him good at business? Funny story, he was working for a guy named Pappy Mott, who had a shop here in San Bernardino. And Pappy threw some catalogs away one day. Malcolm picked them out of the garbage and took them home and was reading them. Next day he came in and said, "Pappy, you're a crook. You buy a part for $10 and sell it for $20. And Pappy said, "Come on in here, Malcolm." And he took a piece of paper and wrote down rent, salaries, electricity, water, all the things that a business costs, right? Malcolm learned all about margins and profit motive and all that stuff. So, of course, then he worked for Kenny and Norm at the K&N shop and then purchased it outright. Why was Malcolm good on a motorcycle? All that riding on that Lambretta, can you imagine? Ripping along on a fire road on a scooter, going berserk. That matchless with ball tires. The reason he got a job at Mott's is because he was always picking through the garbage for old parts because he had no money at the time. So, what made him technically proficient? Building go-karts, building bicycles, working for Pappy, competing so successfully in ISDE competition. Why was he such a happy camper? I think he just loved motorcycles and he loved the people that rode them. Death is inevitable. But for some very powerful reasons, losing Malcolm seems different and surreal and somehow wrong. I remember doing a lot of book signings with Malcolm at events right after we launched the autobiography, and 90% of the comments from folks in line started off this way: Malcolm, I saw On Any Sunday as a kid, and it literally changed my life. So how could a guy that had this much of a positive influence on people be gone? We all know the reason, but it's still a tough pill to swallow. Still, all of us here in this room and the world's motorcyclists have something that nobody can take away, and that's Malcolm's legacy. The stories written in verbal, the meetups at events and shows and here at the store, the images and sound from On Any Sunday, the photos and stories in magazines and in his autobiography, products, new and old, from Malcolm Smith Racing Products, this dealership, the Smith Family Orphanage in Baja, Malcolm's display at the AMA Hall of Fame Museum, and so much more. There's just a lot of really good Malcolm Smith stuff. And of course, there was that grin. Grateful Dead guitarist Jerry Garcia once said this: "Don't be sad because it's over. Be glad that it happened." And boy, are we glad that Malcolm happened. Thank you, Sandy and Betty Smith, his parents. In the final scenes of On Any Sunday, when Malcolm, Mert, and Steve are doing donuts on the beach and riding off into the sunset, you hear Sally Stevens sing the following words: "On any Sunday, like the tail of a kite, flying and dancing in the wind, I'd like to break the string and dance out of sight. I may not pass this way again." Malcolm won't pass this way again, but we are all better off and incredibly lucky to have known the man and to have had him around for these last 83 years. So Godspeed, Malcolm. It was a hell of a ride. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitch. Now, a man who needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway, the great Roger DeCoster.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see the following that Malcolm had and how many lives he touched. And I feel very, very honored to be up here, to be invited up here, although I really didn't know Malcolm like some of these people, and especially like my friend Don Mackey. And so I was not as fortunate as these people before me, not having spent as much time with Malcolm, and I knew of him a lot. I heard a lot of stories. But I only got to ride the one time with him down in Baja, and he was very smooth on the bike and very efficient, and everything I had heard about him was, I could see it in his riding. And while I was waiting for my turn there and worried about what to say and about him, I was wondering what would Malcolm have done in my position if he felt as uncomfortable as me. And one of the things he may have said is, let's go get our bikes. Let's get on the bike and our new trail up to Mike's Sky Ranch or to the observatory. And it's very easy, so don't worry. And I think that's maybe what he would have said, and what would fit me also. I want to wish the best to everybody here tonight, and great memories with Malcolm. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much. I want to bring up Malcolm's youngest son, Alexander.
Racer, actor, business owner, philanthropist, motorcyclist, hero. To the world, my father was many things, but to me, he was always just Dad. Thank you for being with us here today as we celebrate his legacy. No doubt you've heard countless stories about Malcolm's exploits on wheels, his success in business, or his impact on the motorcycling world, or perhaps his philanthropy work. And although it feels strange to set aside any of those achievements, a wise man once told me, when we are gone, we'll be judged only by what we leave behind. So I'd much prefer to tell you about the gift that he left behind to each of his children. His sense of adventure drove everything that he did with us, from the mundane to the epic. We climbed remote mountains, jet skied to islands in the middle of the ocean, drove off-road in places no car should ever go, and we got stuck very often. We rode snowmobiles and motorcycles, traveled the world, took the long way home from school, and generally pursued any type of adventure we could find, big or small. And my father did this better than anyone I've ever met. He also never formally taught us kids anything. Instead, he relied heavily on learning by doing and encouraging his kids to figure it out for themselves. Using this method, he instilled in his children 4 core virtues: curiosity, resourcefulness, independence, and grit. Curiosity to explore the world, resourcefulness to fix anything, independence to do it ourselves, and grit to have the courage and the resolve to do the difficult things. These 4 virtues, all basic minimums required to keep up with my dad, were constantly ingrained in his children. Each adventure was a result of his own curiosity. He always wanted to see what was over that next mountain or down that next canyon. This created late nights and protests from the kids, but always resulted in new discoveries and new adventures. As his children grew, we all developed a similar curiosity. But as expected, these adventures were not without their mishaps. The old adage that adventure is only disaster narrowly averted, that was standard operating procedure in our family. Few stories capture this better than the story of the Yellow Submarine. One rainy day, my dad took us for an after-school adventure in our old yellow Jeep. And predictably, we got stuck and we hiked home in the dark. As we walked, my dad kept telling Joel, Ashley, and I how we'd go back the next morning and we'd get that Jeep out. Well, when we returned the next day, the Jeep was gone. In its place, a huge lake. 2 days, an inflatable boat, and many dives later, my dad pulled that Jeep out of that lake with a tractor, and he got it running again. He met every mishap on our adventures in a similar manner. There was no setback too great to overcome. There was no vehicle that was ever too stuck, and no bike was ever broken beyond repair. And eventually, all of us kids learned this same resourcefulness out of sheer necessity. In my youth, I rode motorcycles often with my father. Although, if you know him, rode with might be a generous way to put what we did. He only knew one speed, fast. And I, being young, was anything but fast. Still, that didn't let him stop him from sharing his passion. He would say, "I'll ride ahead and wait for you up the trail," before taking off and leaving me all on my own, having to catch up with him somewhere up the trail. As I got older and faster, he got older and slower. The roles reversed. And he would say to me, "You ride ahead, but wait for me up the trail." Over time, I grew to love this independence. And it's a trait that all of us kids still carry strongly today. And my final story today is about grit, but also my dad's softer side. In my 20s, I was looking for a motorcycling challenge that my dad hadn't already conquered. As you can imagine, a tough task in and of itself. So I decided to race the infamous Baja 1000 solo. Dad not only joined my pit crew, but as the race's grand marshal, he waved the green flag as I left the start line. Near the finish line in La Paz, I crashed. Dad found me in a local hospital, and with tears in his eyes, he told me, "I should have never let you race." Even in my semi-conscious state, I found this a funny thing for him to say. I remember thinking, "Let me race? You waved the green flag here. What are you talking about?" Besides, he was the one that taught us kids that only adventures requiring grit were the real adventures. Curiosity, resourcefulness, independence, and grit all required virtues for an adventurer, and his life was the master class. He immersed us kids so deeply in adventure that we considered it normal, just as he did. And who knows where this adventurous spirit began? Well, I don't have the answer. I do know this. It's a unique gift, and a gift meant to be shared. Although his absence leaves a void, my promise to him is to share his gift with my daughter Miley and my son Malcolm. Today is a profoundly meaningful day as we celebrate his incredible life and the life of one of the world's greatest adventurers. Thank you for joining us here today.
And now, what better way and more appropriate way to cap it off with Mert Lawwell, one of the stars of the iconic movie On Any Sunday, to talk about it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mert Lawwell, and although Malcolm and I were buddies, we picked opposite kinds of racing to do. I liked speedway stuff that was congested and real involved and high tension, and Malcolm was the opposite. He wanted it to go easy, wanted motorcycling to be fun. He says, "You can't have fun with all that tension around." And I said, "Well, it's the way I like it," and so we both chose different ways of doing our racing. He did the off-road course, which I brought Bruce Brown in at this point and told him, and I told him, I says, "You know, I think what you're doing is the most dangerous kind of racing there is. I mean, there's guys going wide open, headed towards each other." He says, "At least in my racing," I said, "everybody's going the same way." And Malcolm went, "Well, okay." He said he went along with it, but he didn't like it. He didn't like speedway or tension like that. He wanted motorcycling to be fun. And every one of you enjoys that to this day. Very much fun in riding, and in racing. In my case, racing speedway, and Ascot was my favorite racetrack, and it was his hated racetrack. I liked it there because it was intense, and he disliked it because it was intense. But his kind of racing actually proved out to be far more popular, as indicated by all of you here who are, like riding and like off-road and like the space that off-road gives you. So that's what he did, and I did the opposite, and we both achieved our goals in different ways. But he helped a lot of people, all of you included, to just enjoy motorcycling. And that's what it was all about for him. And to me, it was just intense racing. So we were two opposite people, but we both rode motorcycles, and we both raced as hard as we could. And we each won our respective categories. So I wish all the best for the future of Malcolm, and Bruce Brown brought it out best in the films on Any Sunday, where he realized that we were both different, and Bruce thought that it was really interesting that both of us thought the other person's type of racing was the most dangerous and hazardous, but our racing was safe. I thought my racing was safe. He thought his racing was safe. And we were opposite that way. But we were good friends, and we enjoyed palling around with each other. So farewell, Malcolm.
Thank you, Mert. So with that, I think we're going to kick the movie off. A short story. So my wife and I met in high school on Any Sunday. It had just been released, and we saw it. Our first date was to see the movie 3 times in one day, and I actually paid at least one of those times. So enjoy the movie. So I have a prize for whoever has seen that movie. Let's see, how many have seen it at least 10 times? Raise your hand. Okay. How about 20? 30? 50? 100? 101? Okay. All right. I'll give you, Scott, that old countershaft sprocket Malcolm gave me, all right? What a great movie, isn't it? That's one of those movies that never goes old. It's just epic. You can watch it with your kids, your grandkids. They can even show it in church. It's about decent. But a lot of good filming, and I don't know where Mert is, but did Mert leave? Yeah. Really cool to be up here with him and see it. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to bring the family up for some closing comments. Coming up? That's a yes or a no? Oh, okay. What did you read?
Yeah, let's wait for Mimi.
I'll wait for Mimi to see me.
Joan.
What do you say? Should I stay with you until you're done?
Who are we missing? Joel's coming up. His family. His son.
But she's right over there.
Carrie's his wife. Carrie, right? Who are we missing? We're missing, who else do we need to make the family complete? Who are we missing? We're missing somebody. August?
Ryan Madden.
Ryan? Where is it? Oh, here's Ryan. You good?
I can't do it.
Okay.
Nobody can see you.
Yes. I done it.
This is a cool part where it's totally unscripted.
Can I stop? Really?
No.
Can I stop now?
You're up.
Poppy was the best grandpa. He picked me flowers and let me work with him in the garage. He is in heaven now. Thank you for being here for my Poppy and my family.
Yeah, good job. Good job.
I'm not sure I can top that. I remember many rides with my dad. When this discussion came up at a trailhead or a crossroads, how much daylight do we have left? And we would stop and talk about it, but never take our helmets off, only our goggles. If you ever rode with Malcolm, you know what I mean. You don't waste time taking your helmet off if you are on an alpine ridge, a Baja escarpment, or running out of daylight. I remember so many adventures and new things we found when pushing daylight to explore the next trail or just fun, adrenaline-filled adventures. I remember vividly when I caught myself telling other riders, I think we have just enough daylight for this longer trail back on a Colorado Gold Rush ride about 20 years ago. And it struck me then just how important that sense of adventure is to leading a fulfilled life. I hope I can carry on the tradition of adventures as he gave it to me and pass it to my children. To my dad, I'm so sad you ran out of daylight, but I plan to carry your spirit of adventure with me on every trail. I love you and I will miss you.
Thank you guys very much. We appreciate you coming and showing your support. Tell somebody you love them. Have a good night.